Libya's presidential election postponed. The Electoral Commission says the much-anticipated poll cannot be held this Friday as fears grow that a looming political vacuum could lead to more violence. I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Libya's delayed election. Well, it's a major setback that some say could further destabilize Libya. Presidential and parliamentary elections were meant to take place this Friday, but the Electoral Commission says that's become impossible. The planned vote, backed by the United Nations, was a key component of international efforts to end a decade of turmoil by forming a legitimate government. The Libyan High Elections Commission has suggested rescheduling for January 24th, but the underlying disagreements between opposing parties and factions have not gone away. And even more worryingly, rival armed groups have begun mobilizing forces.
As Libyans, we only want elections to bring better times, not worse. The most important thing is that we don't want war, even if things were escalating. If there were no elections, if there was no kind of improvement regarding the political process, or if there was no proper response by the international community. The most important thing is that there will be no war.
We're worried and apprehensive about postponing the elections because enough. We have no desire for the same faces we have now to be at the forefront. We want a new government, a president, a new elected parliament and a constitution, and to move forward. We've had enough of going around in the same place for 10 years.
Well, the vote had faced numerous challenges, including over the laws governing the elections themselves. Earlier this month, the High State Council, a body not recognized by all of Libya's political parties, called for the election to be delayed until February. Days later, the Electoral Commission stated it couldn't draft a final list of candidates until it sorted out various legal issues. Other obstacles include a long-running rift between the country's east and west and the presence of thousands of foreign troops on Libyan soil. After a 2011 uprising ousted strongman Muammar Gaddafi, civil war erupted and split the country between rival administrations. The east is controlled by warlord Khalifa Haftar, while the UN-backed government of Prime Minister Abdul Hamid Dbeiba rules the West. Well, despite the disputes, there's still hope that a political transition can happen. Presidential candidates met in Benghazi after electoral committees were disbanded on Tuesday in an effort to break down obstacles and show that it is possible to unite.
The Libyans are always able to help lead the country into a state of stability. Libya has the abilities and skills to overcome all these challenges in order to help the country evolve.
But how far off is that unity? Well, to discuss that and more, I'm joined now from Tripoli by Salah Elbakkoush. He was an advisor to Libya's High Council of State's negotiating team. Ashur Shamis joins us from London. He's a Libyan journalist and political activist. And completing our panel is Samuel Ramani, who teaches politics at Oxford University. He's also an associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. Thanks all so much for being with us. Salah, I have to begin with you and the actual situation in Tripoli, because we've been hearing that armed groups have been mobilizing now, that they're blocking highways. How dangerous is the situation in the capital?
Well, yesterday the situation was a little bit tense with some movement around the edges of Tripoli, but everything is fine now. I moved around Tripoli today, and there's nothing to be seen in terms of military movement or equipment.
Okay, that is good to hear, because you'll remember Khalid al-Misri, the chairman for Libya's High Council of State, had said in May that if elections were not held as scheduled, the ceasefire will actually disintegrate and chaos would ensue. Is that in any sense what's happening now, especially given that there had initially been the mobilization of some militia forces around Tripoli, or no?
What Mr. Misri said couldn't be further from the truth. The 24th will come. It will be followed by the 25th of December. Very little change will happen. The military movements yesterday had nothing to do with the elections. It was about the firing by the Presidential Council of a military commander, and some units disputed that decision and were unhappy with it. Everybody is saying that the situation has been resolved or it's on its way to resolution. Nothing of the sort is going to happen on the 24th of December. I guess that hyperbole from al-Mishri and others will prove to be unfortunate and misplaced.
Okay, very interesting. So it was the firing of that commander, Abdel Bassat Marwan, that you think kind of rallied the action we saw in Tripoli yesterday and a bit today.
Yes.
Now, then moving on to the elections, you had said, Salah, that they would, of course, be delayed. There is no way that they would be able to happen on the 24th of December. Are you any more convinced that they can still happen in a month's time? Are the structures finally coming into place?
No, because the fundamentals are wrong. Presidential elections cannot happen. They are a bad idea no matter how much you tweak them. We have no legislative branch to control an elected president. The judicial branch is totally unable to do anything. Aguila Saleh the other day restructured the legislative branch assumably in a session that the United Nations now has a copy of that session. There were barely 30 members, and there was no voting on such a resolution at all. Okay. But now we have a new High Council of the Judiciary, and there is a fight between the former president of the council and the new president of the council, and everybody is upset. So how could we have presidential elections in a country that has no constitution, no judicial branch, and no legislative branch? It's total lunacy.
Okay. Let me ask Samuel quickly. If you think really it's as much of a farce as Salah is describing, I mean, postponing them by a month, postponing the elections by a month, would still be a joke because absolutely none of the structure is there. What is it going to take then? Because so many are saying that these elections are fundamental to rebuilding Libya and putting a legitimate government in place, but there's nothing there to do it with.
Yeah, so right now, obviously, there's a grave risk about what happens after December 24th, when Abdulhamid Dbeibeh is no longer considered to be potentially the legitimate prime minister, and the government of national unity is no longer considered to be the legitimate government. And as we know from the experience of the government of national accord, when a government is perceived to have an expired mandate, it can potentially lead to a military escalation, like from the Libyan National Army and from Haftar, from other anti-systemic forces, which might be trying to upset the apple cart here. I agree with Salah, basically, that right now the imminent risk of violence seems to be relatively limited. But equally, if elections are held and there's very low turnout, like, for example, the 2014 HOR elections, House of Representative elections, there's only 18% turnout. If there's divisions between East and West, if different rival factions do not necessarily recognize the results and then take up arms to dispute the results, you could have a scenario that's even worse than letting the mandate expire. So I think that elections right now, or delaying them for a month, is not going to be the solution. It's not going to be the panacea. What really needs to be done is several things. First of all, the United Nations needs to be very clear what its mandate is and what its role is. Is it going to be just a dialogue facilitator, or is it actually going to create a durable roadmap and try to help and steer Libyans together? Jan Kubis was taking the hands-off approach, which ended up being quite disastrous. Stephanie Williams is likely taking the more hands-on approach, and we have to see. Other regional actors, like Italy, North African countries, maybe great powers, need to play a role in bringing the international actors together to ensure that all of them are working together in support of the elections and none of them are acting as spoilers of peace. And finally, there needs to be a greater consensus within the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum, as well as different factions that are now engaging in subversive activities like the blocking of oil ports and encouraging them to come to the table. So there's a lot that needs to be done diplomatically before elections can be held, but it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario regardless.
Right. Still, Samuel, though, most of what you described does fall into the responsibility of the international community. and outsiders taking up the roles of sorting things out in Libya, mainly via the UN, when Libyans would really much rather see it done from the inside out. Let me ask Ashur Shamis, because you've said what Libya needs now is to clean up its own political environment. Tell us how Libya does that.
Well, first of all, you've got the foreign forces in Libya. You've got foreign interferers from all countries, from all sides, starting from the United States down to the Emirates, who are meddling in the Libyan situation. They are not helping, they are interfering. Unless those forces and powers take their hands off Libya, there will still be a quagmire in the country. That's one thing. The other thing is that if the military forces do not leave Libya at this stage, then there will be no possibility of peace or stability, because this is what people like Haftar are depending on. They are putting all their power behind the foreign forces. The people who fight in Libya are not Libyans. They are foreign forces from Chad, from Russia, and so on. And unless these are directed by Libyan generals and so on, but unless these people are withdrawn, there will be no stability in Libya.
Let me ask Salah Elbakkoush what you think of that. I mean, is it really all a matter of just getting foreign forces out of Libya and that Libyans could more or less manage it themselves? Or is there really a point, after so many years of dictatorship, that international help is fundamental to moving this process forward? And whether Libya likes it or not, foreign powers will have to come in to play somehow to help Libya build its political future.
Look, ideally, if the foreign forces in Libya are out, that will be a great help. But we have to admit that these foreign forces were invited by Libyan parties. And Libyan parties depend on these foreign forces, so it's a catch-22. I mean, these forces are not going to go away without Libyan parties giving up on them, and Libyan parties are not going to give up on them until they get what they wanted. So it's a bit more complicated than just telling foreign forces, okay, goodbye, we don't need you. The Libyans themselves have proven over the past 10 years that they cannot get together and solve their problems on their own. They need help. Libya was created in 1951 by the UN. So with the help of the UN and with the help of Britain and the United States and other countries, we need help. We have no political class. We have no political experience. Over 42 years, Law 72 of the Gaddafi regime will hang you for knowing that somebody joined the party and he didn't tell the authorities about it. So here we are, 10 years, we are trying our best, but our best is not good enough and we need help.
Right. Samuel, I mean, would you agree with that? And I mean, because at this point, some are questioning if the election is actually being held for Libyans themselves or for the international bodies that are helping to organize it?
Well, that's the interesting question. I mean, obviously, the United Nations and the Western countries have a clear desire to see these elections take place as soon as possible, obviously, not just because of the backdrop of the fact that in 2011, the whole reason for the removal of Muammar Gaddafi was to establish a democracy in Libya. And now 10 years later, there's been such a movement towards state fragility and civil war and problems like this. It's kind of like a face-saving measure for them. And for other powers, like Russia in particular, and the Emirates and some, and perhaps even Turkey, they're looking towards seeing candidates that are preferential to their interests dominating and winning. So for the Russians, that would be a strong role for, like, let's say, Khalifa Haftar or Saif Gaddafi. Or for the Turks, it could be Fatih Bashaga or Dibeba, who's a holdover from the GNA, and some others. So there's the elections are effectively a battleground between foreign powers and also a face-saving measure for the Western countries. But I think that these powers need to keep in mind that the Libyan political system and the level of dialogue and the level of agreement amongst Libyans has not reached a sufficient threshold to hold them at this very moment. And as the others have said, as long as the Turks and the Wagner Group remain in place, the possibility for this conflict to reignite and for the tinderbox to reignite remains too high. So remove the foreign forces, establish basically a set of rules and procedural systems for candidates to run, and then hold elections at a later date. That seems to be the most prudent approach.
I know ideally you would like to see foreign forces taken out of Libya, but as Salah was saying, the truth is there is this catch-22, that international help is needed and that a lot of the international forces are there because they were called upon by Libyans. So what would you ideally then, considering that, like to see going forward as far as the elections are concerned? Would you like to see it really held in a month's time, or is it still too risky for Libyans?
No, I think what is needed in Libya now is to start again, start from another beginning, I'm afraid, to have, first of all, a good government, as good as possible, that will be coordinated, well-chosen, and this government might be, the current one or a new one, but a government that will serve the people. That's one thing. Somebody to have a hand on the practical and daily things in Libya to be organized, because Libya is collapsed now as a state, as a country. And then prepare for parliamentary elections, not presidential elections. Give yourself time, 1 year, 2 years, to prepare for that. In Libya, the problem is, and this is what the international community seems to understand, in Libya there is no democratic culture. There is nothing on the ground on which to build something. They say we want fair and credible elections and so on. How can you achieve that,
right,
where there is no way to build a democracy or elections.
Salah, you had been explaining the same. Let me pick up on a point that Ashur was making there, and that is it possible maybe to take the focus off electing a president right now and work on drafting, a constitution via an elected parliament, so you could at least get the representation that way, and not appoint a single man that might be too close to having too much power?
Exactly. That's in general the idea. Presidential elections, are a zero-sum equation. You have now the three leading candidates, Haftar, Dbeiba, and Saif. If you take any of them out, you're not going to have elections in their areas of spheres of control in the east, the south, or the west. And if you leave them all in, nobody is going to recognize, the other two are not going to recognize the winner as president. So it's a dead-end street with the writing on the wall, but we continue to drive fast on that road. I think now the priority is to regain for the United Nations and the Libyan political dialogue, to regain the initiative from Aguila Saleh, Khalid al-Mishri, Haftar, and the others who are trying to monopolize everything and take us back prior to the roadmap, prior to Geneva, prior to the Government of National Accord, regain that momentum, and then get back on the track of parliamentary elections. People are excited about it. We have over 5,000 candidates for 200 seats. People are excited about that, and people are insisting that they are not going to allow Haftar or anybody else to choose, pick and choose the candidates. So there is a movement there. Once you have a parliament in place, a new parliament, we get rid of this multiple bodies that claim to be legitimate, who've been in power for over 7 years, while their mandate was for 2 years. That would be a great movement forward. We can then work on a constitution, and if the constitution decides that we're going to have a presidential system, we'll have presidential elections. But having presidential elections with no constitution, nothing that says we are a presidential system, is a bit crazy, I think.
Okay, Samuel, I mean, that sounds, I won't say relatively easy, but logical at the very least. Forget the presidential election right now and appointing, one person to have disproportionately perhaps more power, and let's look at parliamentary representation, get the infrastructure in place, draft the constitution, and then Libya can think about moving forward and having that kind of presidential representation for the country.
Well, I think that would definitely be probably the ideal road to take, because first of all, if you're looking at parliamentary representation, you're going to be trying to create a situation where all the Libyan factions are really represented. So you're basically going to be able to heal the divide between the East and West. You'll be able to encourage the militias that have taken form in specific cities such as Misrata, as well as in parts of eastern Libya, to demobilize militarily and get involved and reintegrated into the political process, because that's a major threat not just to the political stability of Libya, but also to the stability of Libya's energy and oil infrastructure. We've seen that just recently with the blockade of Al-Sharara. After the elections were canceled, that's led to 300,000 barrels of oil not getting out of the ground and being exported. So it's important to demobilize those militias, get them into the political process, and make a more inclusive political system, and draft a constitution, which has been worked on intermittently since the end of the Arab Spring, since 2012, and then proceed to presidential elections. And that would be probably a more effective approach to take.
Now, why isn't it being carried out that way? Sounds like a no-brainer.
Well, I think that it's not being carried out that way in part because there is so much political disagreements between the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum. There were 75 members who basically, when Jan Kubis was trying to convene them in early July, basically saying that we're not going to leave this room until we've come up to an established framework on how the elections are going to be held, the rules for the candidates to run, and all the procedures. They got in there, they were involved in personal squabbling. There was a lot of internecine divisions that basically came forward, and nobody internationally or locally was able to manage it. So there's basically been a state of anarchy and chaos amongst very people who are trying to resolve the problem.
Why is that not correct, Salah, in your opinion?
Because that's not, the political agreement, Article 4 of the political agreement says that the House of Representatives and the High Council of State have 60 days to come up with the constitutional basis and the legal and the laws for the elections. When they failed to do that on 20th of February last year, Kopich refused to move to the third paragraph of that article, which says that the whole matter should be referred to the LPDF. He continued with Aguila Saleh and the HOR, and we got these ridiculous laws, and now we are in this trouble. At the end of June, 6 months later, Kopich found himself stuck, and he went to the LPDF and told them in 3 days to come up with laws for the elections on a constitutional basis, which is very unfair. Now Stephanie Williams has to dig the UNSMIL out of that hole that Kopich put the political process in, and for Kopich to rely on HOR to draft laws to take itself out of the equation is crazy. I mean, that's like asking turkeys to vote for Christmas.
Okay. Samuel, is that fair? Is he made a point there?
He has made a point there, absolutely. I mean, the HOR is certainly not inclined to really change the status quo that's going to basically reduce Aguila Saleh's own power. So absolutely, I think that was the definite proximate antecedent for what we saw in the chaos that unfolded in July that really set the tone for where we are now.
Okay, but I mean, Salah, I'm going to finish with you quickly. We just have about a minute left. I mean, do you see Libya at some point in the near future getting this sorted, perhaps just getting to the parliamentary elections, moving forward with drafting the constitution? Do you see it in the cards? Are you relatively confident that at least those first steps can be taken to putting the country back on a path to reconciliation and actually getting the peace back on the table?
I think it can. Right now, Stephanie Williams is engaged with all parts of the country, all parts of the political spectrum. Today, there were good news. She met with the LPDF members, and especially the women in the LPDF members were very adamant about regaining the initiative and taking it back from Aguila Salah, who doesn't want any elections, and move forward with the parliamentary elections, and hopefully things will improve once we remove these great blocks of the HOR and the HES, the High Council of State, out of the equation. I think we can move forward.
Salah Elbakkoush, Samuel Ramani, and Ashur Shamis. I'd like to thank all three of you so much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Very unfortunately, we're out of time for this panel, but really appreciate all your insights. And thanks to our viewers, of course, for being with us as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at @the_Newsmakers. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.